Although the Ukrainian army suffered repeated defeats on the main battlefield, it relied on Western aid from behind to achieve its goals. Drones continued to arrive at the front lines. A Russian soldier is on the ground. The drone barged into the basement without warning during the lunch break, but Yujianyi scraped against the brick wall, causing the machine to go out of control and failing to trigger the ammunition's detonation conditions. Just as a soldier was celebrating his narrow escape, another drone arrived. Alas, this calamity was destined to befall me. This Russian sergeant. The soldier had already shot down the drone with the butt of his rifle, but his curiosity got the better of him. Driven to go forward and check. Having just escaped death, he infiltrated the Russian army's mobile unit. Avoid engaging in activities that could invite a swarm of drones. The successive attacks caused heavy losses to the squad, with most of their motorcycles. Injured and unable to use their skills, the team members could only help each other retreat on foot. The remaining 2 team members dodged the bombs dropped by the drone with their agile movements and ultimately survived. In the suburbs of Kursk, Ukrainian drones are as numerous as FLIs. Once they launch an attack, the Russian armored forces then swarmed in, a tactic that left those lacking. Russian forces have suffered greatly from their anti-drone equipment. Recently, Lithuania and Sweden provided the Ukrainian army with vehicles worth another 20 million euros, and Ukraine handed them over to Ukraine. Pay for 2,500 drones from a well-known brand. In response to the threat from drones, the Russian military had previously developed a system of unmanned aerial vehicle UAV systems protect targets through electronic jamming. However, it appears that the test has not been passed. Otherwise, the front lines wouldn't be suffering huge equipment losses every day. Some civilian organizations have proposed each squad is equipped with a net gun for large area coverage. The grenade's area of effect is enough to paralyze enemy equipment after a hit. It can even activate the parachute in order to better capture loot. This weapon can also be carried by drones to capture enemy drones. Human-machine interaction thus achieves the goal of using drones to counter drones in drone warfare tactics. And the current situation is, with the new changes and Trump's return to power, the Western Original Homes program will likely be terminated. According to the British Times, reports reveal that the Ukrainian military is using NEXAN Jet drones manufactured by the British company Karen Lenz. Logistics support for the raid on the oil refinery deep in Russia. Oil target. The furthest they reached was Fergograd and Yaroslav. Even Russia's 4th largest oil refinery was bombed. This wasn't something Ukraine did on its own. The assembled goods are genuine British military products, etc. In effect, the UK directly and indirectly participated in the game. Strikes on Russian soil. The reason why this NEXAN drone is difficult to defend against is because it possesses a unique set of skills specifically designed to counter Russian air defense. The wingspan is less than 3 meters and made of carbon fiber, resulting in an extremely small radar cross-section. The tail section uses a slit nozzle designed to minimize engine heat signature. The reduced effectiveness makes it difficult for ordinary man-portable air defense missiles to lock on. The most amazing, it is completely independent of GPS. The Russian military relied entirely on preloaded digital maps to autonomously fly along preset routes. My best skill is electricity. Sub-jamming GPS suppression is basically ineffective against it. In other words, the Russian military's commonly used 3-pronged approach to air defense directly. 2.5 of them were rendered useless, so they could only rely on brute force. Air defense system collision. Luck interception is precisely for this reason. This drone caused considerable damage to the Russian military. The problem was that the Ukrainian-made drones previously had a short range. Poor anti-interference capabilities mean they can only fight in border areas. Now there is the UK or Canada. Ukrainian troops are able to penetrate hundreds of kilometers into Russian territory and break through defenses. Russian military expert Nutov made a ruthless move in this situation. He stated that the UK was directly providing drones to Ukraine. This is equivalent to attacking Russian territory. Disguised, Russia has every right to participate in the war. The statement about launching retaliatory strikes against the British factories that produce these drones. It's not just empty talk. According to Russia's previous demarcation, the established red line is the supply of weapons to Ukraine for strikes against Russian territory. All of them fall under the category of legitimate targets. The principle is sound, but it needs to be implemented. In practice, it's even more difficult than climbing to heaven. Everyone, knowing that the UK is a NATO member, if Russian missiles were to fly over the UK, bombing a military factory on home soil is tantamount to directly attacking. The entire NATO was at war. Russia cannot afford the consequences, let alone attacking Britain itself. Even the Yuanwu weapons transit station used to attack Eastern Europe was so outdated. Russia has always been extremely cautious, fearing that it might completely drag NATO into the mess. Therefore, the experts' advocacy for revenge, while sounding satisfying, is actually more of a facade. The attitude and warnings are fundamental in the short term. The only possibility that it won't land is... What's even more troubling for Russia is that it can't help but watch British drones fly back to its homeland time and time again. After the country opened this door, there will likely be a lot of. It's out of control now, and it's just one company in the UK. If other Western countries were to experience the same fate with their drones, following suit, they all sent their own drones to Ukraine. What Russia faces? The situation is one of repeated bombing raids by drones from various countries. How will we defend against that? The air pressure will increase exponentially, making it impossible for rear facilities to defend against, and it will be economical. Loss. Also, the Pandora's box of increasingly large drone warfare has been opened. Next, Russia. Rose will only face more and more challenges. The increasingly advanced Western drones in this game are unseen. The war of attrition, fueled by gunpowder, is still far off. Not yet the end. General Jing never expected the battle to develop into this situation. Now, not only are Ukrainian drones causing trouble every now and then, but even the nearby King Jingmu. The officials also began to pressure more and more pro-war factions to demand a state of war, to launch a full-scale war and take Ukraine in one fell swoop. In the early hours of the 20th, more than a dozen regions across Russia were again attacked. Massive drone attacks. Russian military certificate. The number shot down in just 24 hours was much higher. Up to 1,158 military and civilian facilities in multiple regions were severely damaged. Damage. Hurt. This is the first time Ukraine has issued a statement since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The largest drone attack ever launched. Facing Ukraine's increasing. The increasingly frequent drone attacks have finally made the pro-war faction in Russia restless. Russian State Duma Defense Committee member Klesnik spoke to the media. Russia will definitely respond to these harsh words. But then he shifted his tone and emphasized that things had come to this point. If it continues as before, initiated after the fact, revenge, it is no longer sufficient to serve as a deterrent. Only by fully entering war, the system mobilized the entire nation and achieved military success in one fell swoop. Only by achieving all the established objectives of the operation can similar attacks be prevented from happening again. Since the protracted conflict between Russia and Russia, such voices have not been absent from within Russia. But in the past, is it the media or people? Strong voices from intermediaries. Now even Klesnik, a core figure in the field of national security. Such members of the Duma Defense Committee are only seen shouting in the media. Such words are quite rare. The war dragged on. Especially the frequent domestic incidents have already affected the entire Russian Federation. Russian society felt the impact of the war, the impact of the dispute. Russian media outlets, including RIA Novosti, compiled statistics based on battle reports released by the Russian military. Just this year, 7 months in Russia, within Sri Lanka's 52 federal subjects. Ukrainian drone intercepted by Russian air defense forces. The number of aircraft has reached as high as 54,000 and continues to rise. Russian military day earlier this year. On average, only 118 drones were intercepted, but by July, this number soared. The number of aircraft has increased to 425. If Russia does not make a decision, a strong response, this number at the end of the year, the number of words will likely rise significantly. General Pass. People were amazed by these figures regarding Ukraine's drones. The attack reached such a high intensity and work. For the Duma Defense Committee, Kolesnik, a member of the team, understood that Russia needed to consume a large amount of anti-aircraft munitions behind this. This type of drone costs far more than the cheap drones from Ukraine. Moreover, Ukraine has the North behind it. Approximately the European Union and almost the entire Western world. Russia received aid, but it can only rely on itself. Even if Russia manages to hold on in the long run, it will continue to lose ground. As a security official, Krasnik was unable to do anything about blood. Russia is being slowly worn down. The current environment in Russia is also leading to a rise in calls for a hardline stance. 2 years ago, besides being close to the front lines, several border regions outside Russia, including Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk, Russian society was largely unaware of the effects of war. Ring. But now, whether it's St. Petersburg or Moscow, these large cities, it was then discovered that the infrastructure in the rear of Siberia was frequently attacked. The billowing smoke from oil refineries and logistics warehouses instantly brought ordinary people to their senses that war was imminent. Beside yourself. 9 of Russia's top 10 oil refineries have now been attacked, forced to reduce production or even production halt. As a major energy producer, Russia's people need. You have to queue for hours or even more than a dozen hours to get gas. The uninvited Ukrainian drones have compromised the safety of the entire Russian society. A decline in overall mood and depression. Let more and more. Many Russians cannot accept this. The demand is to enter a full wartime state and seize all the predetermined objectives of the special military operation in one fell swoop. The calls for help grew louder. The bigger it gets. But entering a state of war is easier said than done. 20. In September 2022, Russia announced a partial operation deployment. Mobilization led to a large number of young men fleeing the country. As the war progressed, social discontent also. In order to stabilize the situation during the spread, migrant workers, driven by their emotional state, are forced to push for legislation restricting the publication of negative information. News regulations prohibit publicly denying special military operations. Although there was no large-scale anti-war movement in the society. Despite the movement, war fatigue and war weariness continued to rise. The Levada Center, Russia's most recognized independent polling organization through long-term tracking and research. A set of survey results were released in June of this year. Approximately 66% of the public supported initiating peace negotiations, while at the same time, those who advocate a full-scale wartime state and indefinite continuous combat account for only a small percentage. Approximately 25%. Moscow elite. A related assessment was also conducted in February of this year. Customer. Sergei Kirilenko, first Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Office and a core member of the working team. He led the drafting of a document entitled Strategic Assessment Report After the Victory. The report argues that if Russia were to enter a state of full-scale war, it would provoke further choices from the West. Confrontation cannot even be ruled out. The possibility of a full-scale military conflict. The report concludes that if we consider the overall economy, militarization, a sharp decline in population, and complete and prolonged isolation from the West, even if you win in the end, victory is not worth the loss. As an experienced leader, foreign workers must consider not only the current war situation but also the country's development. In this situation, as long as the front line can maintain stability, the future of the nation and the people will be secured. The palace would not easily consider entering a full-scale wartime state. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you. Watch.